Ever think about what it would feel like if the ground just vanished beneath you? I mean, that's what people all across the Caribbean went through. This past Saturday, a 7.6 magnitude earthquake hit. And get this, the epicenter was only 10 kilometers deep. Super shallow for an earthquake. We've got some reports, research, and expert analysis to go through today. So let's dive into the specifics of this event, that we'll bring in our expert to help us understand what this all means for the Caribbean.
It's definitely a significant event, and as you said, the depth of the earthquake plays a huge role in how widely it's felt. A 10-kilometer depth puts this quake practically right on the surface, so the energy released had a more direct impact on the surrounding areas.
Makes sense. So where exactly do people feel it the most?
Well, based on the data we have, it seems the strongest tremors were reported in Honduras, Belize, Mexico, the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Cuba, and even parts of Puerto Rico felt it. That's a pretty vast area.
Wow. Talk about a widespread impact. I haven't heard much about damage in the Cayman Islands themselves.
Right. That's what's interesting. We haven't seen reports of serious damage from the Cayman Islands yet, even though that's where the epicenter was. But remember, the impact of an earthquake isn't just about the epicenter. It's about how the energy travels through the Earth's crust. And in this case, that energy traveled far and wide.
Okay, so even though the epicenter was near the Cayman Islands, the earthquake's impact was felt much further away.
Precisely. And this brings up another crucial aspect, the tsunami threat. The U.S. National Tsunami Warning Center issued advisories for a bunch of areas, initially including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, I remember seeing those alerts. It must have been pretty nerve-wracking for people in those areas.
Absolutely. Especially considering the projected wave heights up to 3 meters above tide level in Cuba. That's not something to take lightly, thankfully. Those advisories for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands were later canceled. However, the tsunami threat remained for Cuba, Honduras, and the Cayman Islands for a while.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
At least for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. But a 3-meter wave, that's pretty terrifying.
It definitely highlights the destructive power of these events, even if, in this case, a major tsunami didn't ultimately materialize.
Yeah.
You know, it's impressive how authorities in these countries were so proactive. I read about alert systems being activated, evacuations being ordered, and warnings going out about potential sea level rises. It seems like that preparedness really made a difference.
I completely agree. Their quick response likely played a huge role in minimizing casualties and damage. Having those systems in place, and importantly, knowing how to use them effectively is crucial when dealing with these kinds of natural disasters.
So we dodged a major tsunami this time, but there were still some reports of damage in Honduras and Cuba. What are we seeing there?
The reports coming out of Honduras mention damaged homes and power outages in some areas. In Cuba, there are reports of shattered windows and belongings being thrown around inside homes. It's a reminder that even without a tsunami, an earthquake of this magnitude can cause significant disruption. It's definitely unsettling to think about. The ground shaking, not knowing what's going to happen next. It must be incredibly stressful for people in those areas.
Exactly. The psychological impact of these events can be just as significant as the physical damage. The fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty, it takes a toll. And that's something we often overlook when talking about the impact of natural disasters.
Okay, so we've talked about the what and the where. Now let's get into the why. You're the expert here, so tell us, what's going on beneath the surface that causes these powerful earthquakes in the Caribbean?
Well, to understand that, we need to talk about tectonic plates. The Caribbean region sits right on the boundary of 2 massive plates, the North American plate and the Caribbean plate. These plates are constantly moving, shifting, and grinding against each other. And near the Cayman Islands, there's a particularly active fault line called the Cayman Trough.
I've heard of tectonic plates.
Yeah.
But I've never quite understood how they work.
Think of them like gigantic puzzle pieces that make up the Earth's outer layer. But these pieces don't fit together perfectly. They're constantly pushing and pulling against each other. And all that friction and pressure builds up over time. When that pressure gets released, we get an earthquake.
So, in this case, the North American and Caribbean plates are causing the earthquakes in the Caribbean.
Exactly. And the Cayman Trough, where this earthquake originated, is a type of fault called a transform fault. This means the plates are sliding horizontally past each other, which is what generates the energy that we feel as an earthquake.
That's fascinating. And I know the Caribbean has experienced its share of powerful earthquakes in the past.
Absolutely. This region has a long history of seismic activity. The devastating 2010 Haiti earthquake, A magnitude 7.0 is a stark example of the destruction these events can cause.
That was a horrible tragedy, and it's a stark reminder of how vulnerable the Caribbean is to these earthquakes. Were there other notable earthquakes in the region's history?
Definitely. If we go back further, there was the 1907 Kingston earthquake in Jamaica, which was a magnitude 6.5, and the 1969 Cienfuegos earthquake in Cuba, also a 6.5. So as you can see, seismic activity is a recurring theme in this part of the world. It's a region where the Earth is constantly in motion.
It makes you realize how unpredictable nature can be. So we have this volatile tectonic environment, and then we have the potential for aftershocks on top of that. What exactly are aftershocks, and how dangerous can they be?
Aftershocks are basically smaller earthquakes that happen after a larger one. Think of it like the Earth settling back into place after being shaken up. They can continue for days, weeks, or even months after the main earthquake. And while they're usually less intense, they can still cause damage, especially to structures that have already been weakened.
That's a really good point. It's not just about surviving the initial earthquake, but also being prepared for what comes after.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these processes and preparing for them is so crucial. It's about building resilience in these communities so they can bounce back from these events.
Okay, so given this constant risk of earthquakes in the Caribbean, what are some key things that need to be in place to ensure the safety and resilience of these communities? We know they have early warning systems.
Yeah.
But what else is being done?
That's a critical question. It's really a multi-pronged approach. We need to look at things like early warning systems, building codes designed for earthquake-prone regions, and public education on earthquake safety.
That makes sense. It's like building a safety net from multiple angles. Let's start with early warning systems. How do those actually work in practice?
Early warning systems are designed to detect earthquakes the moment they occur and send out alerts as quickly as possible. They rely on a network of seismic sensors that are placed in earthquake-prone regions. These sensors pick up the first subtle waves of an earthquake, called P waves.
P waves, what are those?
P waves are a type of seismic wave that travels faster than the more destructive S waves. Think of them as the scouts, arriving first and signaling that something bigger is coming.
So like a race against time to get that information out before the more damaging waves hit.
Precisely. The sensors transmit the data to a central processing center, where sophisticated algorithms analyze the information in real time. The system determines the location, magnitude, and potential impact of the earthquake, and then automatically sends out alerts through text messages, sirens, and public address systems.
So it's like a high-tech network that's constantly monitoring the Earth's movements and sounding the alarm when something's up.
Exactly. And those few seconds or minutes of warning can make a world of difference. They give people time to take cover, move away from dangerous areas, and prepare for the shaking.
It's amazing how technology can be used to provide that window of opportunity for people to protect themselves.
It truly is, but technology is only one part of the equation. Public awareness and education are just as important. People need to know what those alerts mean, how to respond appropriately, and where to seek shelter if necessary.
Right. It's not enough to have the technology. People need to know how to use it effectively. So let's move on to building codes. I'm curious about the specific design features that make structures earthquake resistant. What are some of the key things engineers focus on?
One of the most important principles is flexibility. You might think you want a building to be as strong and unyielding as possible during an earthquake, but actually, it's the opposite. A building that's too rigid will crack and crumble under the immense forces of an earthquake. Instead, engineers aim to create structures that can sway and absorb the shocks without collapsing.
That's interesting. So instead of resisting the earthquake, you want the building to kind of move with it.
Exactly. It's about designing buildings that can dance with the earthquake rather than fight against it. There are various techniques to achieve this, like using base isolation systems that allow the building to move independently of its foundation, or incorporating flexible materials like steel and wood that can bend and absorb energy.
It's like designing a building that's both strong and adaptable. It's fascinating how these principles are based on nature's ability to withstand powerful forces. So, we've talked about early warning systems and building codes. What about public education? What role does that play in earthquake preparedness?
Public education is absolutely crucial. It's about making sure people know what to do when the ground starts shaking, how to take cover, how to evacuate safely, and how to prepare for the aftermath.
It's about empowering people with the knowledge and skills to protect themselves.
Precisely. One of the most important things is to have a plan. Families and individuals need to discuss what they would do in the event of an earthquake, where they would meet, how they would communicate, and what supplies they would need. Having a plan in place can help reduce anxiety and ensure that everyone knows what to do when the shaking starts.
It's like having a roadmap for navigating those critical moments when quick thinking and decisive action are paramount.
Exactly. Another crucial aspect of public education is teaching people the drop, cover, and hold on technique. Ah, yes. The classic earthquake safety drill. Why is that so important?
It's all about protecting yourself
Mhm.
from falling debris and being thrown around. Dropping to the ground prevents you from being knocked over, covering your head and neck with your arms, shield you from falling objects, and holding on to a sturdy piece of furniture keeps you grounded.
So, it's those simple actions that can make a big difference in preventing injury.
Absolutely. And it's also crucial to emphasize that staying indoors and taking cover under a sturdy table or desk is generally much safer than trying to run outside during an earthquake.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to be caught in the open with buildings and debris potentially falling around you. What about after the shaking stops?
Once the shaking stops, it's important to check for injuries, evacuate the building if necessary, and be aware of the potential for aftershocks. Public education campaigns also need to address the psychological impact of earthquakes. It's important to acknowledge that fear, anxiety, and stress are natural reactions to these traumatic events. It's a reminder that earthquake preparedness isn't just about physical safety, but mental and emotional well-being as well. So, it sounds like a comprehensive approach to earthquake preparedness requires a strategy that addresses both the physical and psychological aspects. What about the economic side of things? You mentioned earlier the need for international cooperation. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. International cooperation plays a vital role in earthquake preparedness and response, especially in regions with limited resources. This cooperation can involve sharing scientific knowledge and expertise, providing technical assistance, and coordinating disaster relief efforts.
So it's about leveraging global resources and expertise
Yeah.
to support the communities that are most vulnerable.
Exactly.
Wow.
For example, countries with advanced earthquake monitoring and early warning systems can share their technology and knowledge with other nations. Similarly, engineers and scientists can collaborate to develop and implement earthquake-resistant building codes that are tailored to specific regional needs.
It's like building a global network of support and solidarity to enhance earthquake resilience worldwide. And this cooperation also extends to post-earthquake recovery efforts.
Absolutely. When a devastating earthquake strikes, international aid organizations, governments, and NGOs often work together to provide humanitarian assistance, medical care, and reconstruction support to affected communities. This coordinated effort can be crucial in helping these communities rebuild their lives and infrastructure.
It's a testament to the power of human compassion and collaboration in the face of adversity. And it brings us back to the economic impact of earthquakes.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on the financial burden that these events place on communities and countries?
Of course, the economic costs of earthquakes can be staggering, especially in regions with high population densities and vulnerable infrastructure. These costs include not only the immediate damage to buildings and other physical assets, but also the disruption to businesses, supply chains, and essential services.
It's like a ripple effect that extends far beyond the initial tremors.
Exactly. And the economic impact can be particularly severe in developing countries, where resources for recovery and reconstruction may be limited in some cases. The cost of rebuilding after a major earthquake can exceed a country's entire annual GDP.
That's a sobering thought. It underscores the need for a proactive approach to earthquake preparedness. Investing in mitigation measures beforehand can ultimately save lives and reduce the economic burden in the long run.
Absolutely. Every dollar invested in earthquake preparedness can save multiple dollars in recovery costs. It's a wise investment in the safety and well-being of communities and nations.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us
It's been my pleasure.
and for you listening. We're going to take a moment to gather our thoughts, but stick with us. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into this important topic. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been discussing the earthquake that recently shook the Caribbean, and we've been talking about the importance of preparedness. It really is fascinating how much goes into making sure communities can withstand these kinds of events.
It's definitely a multifaceted challenge, and it requires a long-term perspective. It's not just about reacting to an earthquake after it happens. It's about constantly working to reduce risk and increase resilience.
You mentioned earlier that there are three main areas to focus on.
Yeah.
Early warning systems, building codes,
Hmm.
and public education. We've touched on each of these, but I'd love to dig a little deeper. Let's start with early warning systems. Can you walk us through how these systems actually work in practice?
Sure. Imagine a network of super sensitive sensors strategically placed throughout earthquake-prone regions. These sensors are constantly monitoring the Earth's movements, and they're designed to pick up the very first tremors of an earthquake, those P waves we talked about earlier.
It's like having a network of listening posts
Yeah.
that are tuned in to the Earth's vibrations.
Yeah. Exactly. And when these sensors detect a P wave, they immediately send that data to a central processing center. Think of it as a high-tech nerve center, where sophisticated algorithms analyze the incoming information in real time. The system determines the location, magnitude, and potential impact of the earthquake in a matter of seconds.
That's incredible. So it's like a race against time to get that information out to the public before the more damaging waves arrive.
Precisely. And that's where the early warning part comes in. Once the system has assessed the threat, it automatically triggers alerts through various channels. You might get a text message on your phone, hear a siren blaring, or receive an alert through a public address system.
Those few seconds or even minutes could be crucial for people to take action and protect themselves.
Absolutely. It gives people time to take cover, move away from windows or hazardous objects, and prepare for the shaking. It's a life-saving window of opportunity.
It's amazing how technology can be harnessed to give people that critical heads up. But I imagine the effectiveness of these systems also depends on how well prepared people are to receive and act on those alerts.
You're absolutely right. Public awareness and education are essential components of a successful early warning system. People need to understand what those alerts mean, how to respond appropriately, and where to seek shelter if necessary. It's not just about having the technology, it's about having a culture of preparedness.
It's a reminder that technology is only as effective as the human response to it. Okay. So let's move on to building codes. I'm curious to know more about the specific design features that make structures resistant to earthquakes. What are some of the key elements that engineers focus on?
One of the fundamental principles of earthquake-resistant design is to provide buildings with the flexibility to move with the ground motion, rather than resisting it rigidly.
That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want a building to be as solid and unyielding as possible during an earthquake?
It might seem that way, but if a building is too rigid, it can actually crack and crumble under the immense forces of an earthquake. Instead, engineers aim to create structures that can sway and absorb those shocks without collapsing.
So, it's like designing buildings to dance with the earthquake, rather than fight against it.
That's a great way to put it. And there are various techniques to achieve this flexibility. For example, some modern buildings use base isolation systems. These systems basically allow the building to move independently of its foundation, kind of like a shock absorber for the entire structure.
That's fascinating. So the building is almost floating on its foundation.
In a way, yes. And another key aspect is the use of flexible materials. Steel and wood, for example, can bend and absorb energy without breaking, which makes them ideal for earthquake-prone regions.
It's like choosing the right materials for the job. Materials that can withstand the stresses and strains of an earthquake.
Exactly. And then there's the shape and symmetry of the building. Structures that are irregularly shaped or have large, unsupported sections are more vulnerable to damage during earthquakes. So, engineers strive to create buildings that are well-proportioned and have a balanced distribution of weight.
So, it's not just about the materials used, but also the overall design and layout of the structure. It's a holistic approach to building safety and resilience.
Precisely. It's about thinking about the building as a system and how all the different parts work together to withstand seismic forces.
Okay, so we've covered early warning systems and building codes. Let's move on to the crucial role of public education in earthquake preparedness. What are some of the key messages that communities need to be aware of to effectively respond to these events?
Well, one of the most important things is to have a plan. Families and individuals need to sit down and discuss what they would do in the event of an earthquake. Where would they meet? How would they communicate if phone lines are down? What supplies would they need?
It's like creating a roadmap for navigating those critical moments when quick thinking and decisive action are paramount.
Exactly. And having a plan in place can help reduce anxiety and ensure that everyone knows what to do when the shaking starts. Another essential aspect of public education is teaching people how to drop, dot cover, and hold on during an earthquake.
That's the classic earthquake safety drill.
Right.
Can you remind us why that's so important?
Absolutely. Dropping to the ground prevents you from being knocked over by the shaking. Covering your head and neck with your arms protects you from falling debris, and holding on to a sturdy piece of furniture prevents you from being thrown around.
It's those simple actions that can make a huge difference
Hmm.
in protecting yourself from injury. And it's amazing how something so simple can be so effective.
You're right. It's all about minimizing your exposure to danger. And it's crucial to emphasize that staying indoors and taking cover under a sturdy table or desk is generally much safer than trying to run outside during an earthquake.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to be caught in the open with buildings and debris potentially falling around you.
Mm.
What about after the shaking stops? What should people do then?
Once the shaking stops, it's important to check for injuries, evacuate the building if necessary, and be aware of the potential for aftershocks. And this is where the psychological aspect of preparedness comes in. Public education campaigns also need to address the emotional impact of earthquakes. It's important to acknowledge that fear, anxiety, and stress are natural reactions to these traumatic events.
You're right. It's not just about the physical danger,
Yeah.
but also the mental and emotional toll that these events can take.
Exactly. And having access to resources and support systems can help individuals and communities cope with the psychological effects of earthquakes and build resilience in the long term.
It's a reminder that preparedness is not just about surviving the event itself, but also about dealing with the aftermath and the long-term recovery.
Absolutely. And that's where the importance of international cooperation really comes into play.
Right. You mentioned earlier the need for a global effort to build resilience in earthquake-prone regions. Can you elaborate on what that looks like in practice?
Sure. International cooperation can take many forms, from sharing scientific knowledge and technology to providing financial assistance and coordinating relief efforts. For example, countries with advanced earthquake monitoring and early warning systems can help other countries develop their own systems. Engineers and scientists can collaborate on research and share best practices for earthquake-resistant design and construction.
So it's about leveraging the collective expertise and resources of the global community to support those who are most vulnerable to these events.
Exactly. And this cooperation is vital not only in the immediate aftermath of an earthquake, but also in the long-term recovery and rebuilding process.
It's like a global safety net
Yeah.
where countries support each other in times of need.
That's a great way to put it. And this spirit of cooperation is crucial because the economic impact of earthquakes can be devastating, especially for developing countries.
You mentioned earlier that the cost of rebuilding after a major earthquake can exceed a country's entire annual GDP. That's a staggering thought. Can you break down the economic impact a bit further?
Of course, when an earthquake hits, there's the immediate damage to buildings, roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. But the economic ripple effects go far beyond that. Businesses are disrupted, supply chains are broken, and essential services like healthcare and education are interrupted. And all of this has a significant impact on people's livelihoods and the overall economy.
It's like a chain reaction that touches every aspect of society.
Exactly. And the longer it takes to recover and rebuild, the more profound the economic consequences. That's why investing in preparedness is so crucial. It's not just about saving lives, but also about protecting economies and livelihoods.
It makes you realize that preparedness is an investment in the future. The more we can do to mitigate the impact of these events, the better off we'll be in the long run.
I couldn't agree more. It's a shift in mindset from reaction to prevention, and recognizing that preparedness is not just a cost, but an investment that pays dividends in terms of safety, resilience, and economic stability.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you for shedding light on the complexities of earthquake preparedness and response.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, knowledge is power when it comes to facing these challenges.
Well said. And for you listening, stick with us as we continue our deep dive into this crucial topic. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about the 7.6 magnitude earthquake that hit the Caribbean and the importance of being prepared for these kinds of events. It really makes you appreciate the power of nature and how much we still have to learn about our planet.
It's true. Every earthquake teaches us something new, and it pushes us to find better ways to protect ourselves and build more resilient communities.
As we've been discussing all the different aspects of earthquake preparedness, early warning systems, building codes, public education, it's clear that there's a lot of work being done. But I'm curious, what role does scientific research play in all of this?
Research is absolutely fundamental to advancing our understanding of earthquakes and improving our ability to prepare for them. Scientists are constantly working to unravel the mysteries of these powerful forces deep within our planet. and their findings are crucial for developing more effective mitigation strategies.
So it's like a constant quest for knowledge
Yeah,
that's driving progress in earthquake preparedness.
exactly. And there's so many fascinating areas of research that are contributing to this effort. One area that's particularly important is earthquake forecasting. While we can't predict earthquakes with pinpoint accuracy, scientists are getting better at estimating the probability of earthquakes occurring in specific regions over certain time periods.
It's like trying to assess the likelihood of an earthquake happening in a particular area, even if we can't say exactly when or where it will strike.
Precisely. And these forecasting models take into account a wide range of factors, such as historical earthquake data, tectonic plate movements, and stress buildup along fault lines. They can help us identify areas that are at higher risk and guide long-term planning and risk assessment efforts.
It's like creating a roadmap of potential seismic activity to guide preparedness efforts. I imagine this research is closely tied to advancements in earthquake monitoring technology.
Absolutely. The development of more sophisticated seismic sensors, data analysis techniques, and early warning systems is playing a huge role in improving our ability to detect and respond to earthquakes.
It's like having a more refined set of eyes and ears on the ground, constantly listening to the Earth's heartbeat. What other exciting advancements in earthquake research are happening right now?
Well, another area that's really pushing the boundaries is earthquake engineering. Scientists and engineers are constantly working to develop new materials, design techniques, and construction methods that can make buildings and infrastructure more resistant to earthquakes.
There. It's like a constant evolution of building practices to match the challenges posed by these powerful forces. What are some examples of the innovative approaches they're exploring?
One fascinating area is the use of smart materials. These are materials that can change their properties in response to stress or strain. Imagine incorporating these materials into buildings so that they could actually adapt and absorb earthquake energy more effectively.
It's like designing buildings that can react intelligently to the forces of an earthquake. That's incredible.
It is. And this research also extends to developing more effective retrofitting techniques for existing structures. We can't just focus on new buildings. We need to find ways to make older buildings more earthquake resistant as well.
So it's like giving these structures a second chance at withstanding the challenges of a seismic event.
Exactly. And it's much more cost-effective to invest in mitigation measures beforehand than to deal with the aftermath of a devastating earthquake.
That's a good point. It's a reminder that preparedness is an investment in the future. The more we can do to mitigate the impact of these events, the better off we'll be in the long run.
I couldn't agree more. It's a shift in mindset from reaction to prevention, from cleaning up after a disaster, to minimizing the damage in the first place. It's about recognizing that preparedness is not just a cost, but an investment that pays dividends in terms of safety, resilience, and economic stability.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into the world of earthquakes. We've learned so much about the forces that drive these events, the technologies that are helping us prepare for them, and the importance of a global effort to build resilience in vulnerable communities. It's been an incredible journey.
It has, and it's a journey that never really ends. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more we can do to create a safer world.
Well said. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the complexities of earthquakes and the incredible work that's being done to mitigate their impact. While we can't prevent these natural events from happening, we can certainly equip ourselves with the knowledge and resources to face them with greater resilience.
And remember, we're all in this together, whether it's through scientific collaboration, international aid, or simply spreading awareness. Each of us has a role to play in building a more earthquake-resilient world.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of earthquakes. We'll see you next time.